Hello, everyone. My name is Will Schmenner. I'm the head of public programs at the Clark Institute. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this re-recording of the opening lecture of the exhibition Rodin in the United States, Confronting the Modern, and to introduce the exhibition's guest curator, Antoinette Le Normand-Romain. The exhibition will remain here at the Clark through September 18th, before traveling on to the High Museum in Atlanta. I hope you'll be able to visit the exhibition. This lecture in particular is made possible by Gregory Annenberg, Weingarten, Grow at Annenberg. We thank them for their generous support. There are many public programs hosted in conjunction with the exhibition at the Clark. I encourage you all to visit the summer events page of our website for information on our full slate of summer programming. It is a distinct pleasure to introduce the exhibition's curator, Antoinette Le Normand-Romain. Antoinette is a curator and art historian specializing in French sculpture of the 19th and early 20th centuries, with a special focus on Rodin. She served as the curator of sculpture at the Musée d'Orsay from 1977 to 1994, as curator at the Musée Rodin from 1994 to 2006, and as director of the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art from 2006 to 2016. Of special relevance to the present exhibition's focus on American collectors of Rodin's work, Antoinette also served as the Edmund J. Safra Visiting Professor at the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. from 2016 to 2017. Over the course of her distinguished career, she has organized many exhibitions and published extensively on Rodin sculpture. Today's lecture will introduce the present exhibition, Rodin in the United States, Confronting the Modern, which considers Rodin's legacy in the United States. Antoinette's unparalleled understanding of Rodin's work is evident in both the exhibition and accompanying catalog. Thank you, Antoinette, for being here today with us again, and for all of the work you've done on this amazing exhibition.
First of all, I want to say how grateful I am to Olivier Meller and to the Clark team with Esther Bell and Cathy Morris, because it was a great pleasure to be able to organize this show. It's a subject which I always thought was a wonderful subject when you are interested in Rodin. Until now, most of the Rodin exhibitions have been about his life and his process. For instance, the Centenary Show in Paris in 1917 explained his life and then how he used to carve, to model, and also to draw, and his influence on the 20th century sculpture. But today it's different, because we decided that the focus would be the American collectors, would be the taste for Rodin, I could say the love for Rodin, which began very early, as soon as the end of the 19th century. We were able to show here at the Clark a very important piece, which is the great Balzac, today at the MoMA in New York. It's a key piece because it highlights the moment when, after a period of perhaps disaffection to Rodin, his fame and success became larger and larger, and is today perhaps the French sculptor the best represented in American collections. The show is divided in three main parts, following time, in a very simple way. And the first part is called The Era of Collectors, and it is about Rodin's lifetime. It begins in 1893 with these two sculptures, St. John the Baptist and the lovely marble Cupid and Psyche. In 1893, at the same moment, a first sculpture entered the American collections, a sculpture which is this bust of St. John the Baptist. It is a fragment of a large life-size figure exhibited in Paris in 1880. And this bust was became very quickly famous and was appreciated by different collectors. And this one was given the Met by an art dealer, and it is the first sculpture entering an American collection. It's a very nice bronze with a very precise and accurate chiseling, which corresponds to the American taste for Renaissance sculpture, very largely covered at that time. And at the same moment, there was this universal exhibition at Chicago, the Columbian exhibition, in which a special small exhibition was devoted to French modern art, mainly paintings, but Sarah Hallowell, who was a curator of that show and who was an admirer of Rodin, wanted to have some Rodin sculptures. Alors, the trick of the exhibition was to have only things belonging American collections, but she thought that there was no Rodin sculptures in American collections at that date, and she asked Rodin to send some sculptures to America, and she explained that in the catalogue she would invent a name just to pretend that they were already in the United States. And Rodin sent 3 marbles. This one is one of the 3 marbles. But as soon as the show opened, the marbles were thought too natural. The feeling of nature was much too strong for the American taste, and the sculptures were closed in a special cabinet and shown only when people asked for seeing them. They were too natural and perhaps also too sensual in an America which was still very Puritan. The marbles were not bought by anybody. They were back to France, and this one came back to America after different owners. But Rodin was very grateful to Sarah Hallowell, and he gave her some sculptures, and in particular these 2 bronzes, which we have been very lucky, very happy to have been able to locate, because these 2 bronzes were nobody knew about them, and it's the first time they are part of a Rodin exhibition. And I think it's a luck for the Clark exhibition to be able to show them. And they are the 2 only pieces which come from Europe, when all the other sculptures and drawings are today in American collections. So you see here these 2 sculptures, and the small one here, you can recognize it here on Sarah's desk in Moret-sur-Loing, a small town near, not very far from Paris. Alors, this one is a unique cast, and it's also a unique composition made by sticking together 2 small nudes belonging to the time of the Gates of Hell. The other one, which is called Fugit Amor, Love Flies Away, is a much more famous sculpture. There are many copies of this bronze. This one is probably one of the first. And the 2 sculptures are dedicated to Sarah Hallowell. In fact, this marble was already in an American collection and maybe already in the United States. This fallen curated, which is a figure from the Gates of Hell, was bought by Jules Isham in Paris. Jules Hicham was a painter and he studied in Paris. And at that time, he could buy this marble, which belonged to the French painter Bastien Lepage. Bastien Lepage died in 1984, and the marble was to sell, and Hicham could buy it. And we can imagine that he took the marble back to the States when he went back home in 87 or 8. But it was totally unknown, and Sarah Lowell could not borrow it for her special exhibition. And on the other side, you have this beautiful drawing, which was given by Rodin to America in a sign of gratefulness for the help by America, by the help which America brought to France during the First World War. This drawing was rediscovered during all the time of researchers for the show. And it's another thing which I am happy to point out is that we have been able to rediscover perhaps not so many sculptures, except the two dedicated to Sarah Lowell, but many of drawings which were unknown until we did all this research in the previous years. At the beginning of 20th century, Rodin's fame in the United States was between the hands of Catherine Sidney Simpson. Alors, Kate Simpson, as she is most usually called, was a fashionable lady belonging to the best New York society. Her father was a donator to the Met at its beginning. Kate Simpson and her husband, John, went to Paris in 1903, and they admired Rodin's sculptures in French Paris museums, and they decided to have Kate's portrait made by Rodin. The bust was carved quite fast and exhibited in Paris in 1904 and sent to New York, to Kate's home. And you have here the photo of the bust with a dedication by Kate to Rodin, and she calls Rodin my sculptor. Kate and John were very appreciated a lot Rodin's sculptures and drawings, and they commissioned some small bronzes, and in particular this one, which is the small, which we call today the small walking man, and which was at that time a very modern sculpture. This sculpture has been made with two different pieces, a torso which was very decayed because it stayed many years in the studio, and a pair of legs which were in good repair. And Rodin enjoyed the sculpture as it was and thought it was perfect, and he exhibited it in 1900. But the sculpture has no title. It was exhibited on the top of a very high column, and nobody noticed it until the Simpsons decided that it was a very interesting piece of sculpture and commissioned a bronze to Rodin. And this bronze entered the United States in 1904, and it's very early in the same time for Rodin's collection in America, and also in the history of the casts of this sculpture, because it's not the first, but I think it is the second one. And you can see here on the rear some of the beautiful drawings like this one, which Kate and John bought from Rodin, or which Rodin gave to the Simpsons. And most of them had dedications from Rodin to Mrs. Simpson as a sign of our friendship. Mrs. Simpson, as he called her here, who is a friend of my art from the very beginning. and Kate Simpson was interested in Rodin's life and work until his death in 1917. And even after his death, she came back to Paris in 22, and she went to Meudon, where Rodin's studio was. And you can see here as dressed in black because John was dead, and she is in the middle of the studies for her bust. I think it's a nice and very moving photograph. So Kate and John collected the Rodin's works, but at the same time they thought that it would be very important to have some of these sculptures at the Met being the first important American museum, and most of them lived in New York. So they convinced Edward Robinson, who was the vice director of the Met, and also Daniel Chester French, who was very influential in the selection of the works of art, to try to get some Rodin sculptures and to build a first collection. And she explains that Rodin was still living and that they should profit by this situation. And to help, to encourage them, she gave this cast of the Age of Bronze, which was installed at the base of the great staircase of the Met, in a very prominent place. And to thank Robinson, Rodin gave him this drawing. And Kate launched the collection, but the collection was greatly improved through the gift of Thomas Fortune Ryan, who gave a very large sum of money, $25,000, to buy some Rodin sculptures and drawings. And he himself bought two important marbles, which he gave immediately to the Met. But before that, some marbles had entered the collection, and in particular, the Hand of God, which is the first marble entering the collection. So you remember there was a buste of St. John the Baptist, then the Age of Bronze, and the third sculpture was the Hand of God, which is the marble version of a composition which Rodin had made about 10 years earlier, but we are going to speak of it again later. So Adam gave this marble, and then Ryan himself gave Pygmalion and Galatea, and then these two important marbles, which are amongst the best pieces of the Met's collection. And with the money he also gave, the Met bought some sculptures directly from Rodin. And for instance, this beautiful study for the head of Balzac. Rodin had the commission of a monument to Balzac in 1891. And he did many studies for the monument. This one is one of the first, when he wanted to be very close to Balzac's face. After years of work, he went further and further from the original model to the statue, which you know today. They also acquired beautiful drawings, and Rodin, who was very happy of these very important acquisitions, gave the Met some small plasters. And we have to underline that, because Rodin did not like to part with the plasters, but since the Met effort supported by Kate Simpson was so important, he gave donc studies for hands and legs. He had plenty of them in his studio, and he used them frequently for new compositions. And the Met has been very generous and has lent some of these studies for the show. Another woman who was instrumental at that time was Lois Fuller. Lois Fuller was a dancer, and she is known for her serpentine dance with veils and lights, and that was a very new way of dancing at that time. Lois Fuller admired Rodin, and as soon as 1902, 1903, she organized a first Rodin show in New York, but the show had no success at all, and all the sculptures were sent back to France. After that, Rodin and Lois Fuller remained friends. In 1906, she introduced him to the Cambodian dancers, were to be very important, who Rodin admired a lot, and he made many drawings from these young dancers. And to thank her, Rodin gave her this cast of the Thinker with the dedication to Lois Fuller, Auguste Rodin, 1906. And this cast today in the Yale Art Gallery. We do not know anything about the way it followed between 1906 and the time when he entered the Yale Art Gallery, but it was part of Stephen Clark collection between it entered the gallery. Alors, the Thinker is one of the main figures of the Gates of Hell. I'm sure you know that he sits in the middle on the tympanum, and he is here to figure in the same time Dante, the Italian poet who wrote this description of Inferno, of hell, which inspired Rodin, but he is also all the other poets, such as Victor Hugo or Baudelaire, who were poets whom Rodin admired a lot. And the first title of the sculpture was in fact The Poet. And since he's all the poets together, he's naked, because if he had a dress, it would put it in just at a date, at a special date. It would be a poet of the 12th century or the 14th century or 19th century. But since he's totally nude, he can be all the poets at the same time. And after a while, the title became The Thinker, and it is the title under which it is known today. Lois Fuller, the next period, the time when the sculptures, Rodin's sculptures and drawings went from private collections to museums. And this is the second part of the show. This period begins with the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco in 1915. The France had a special pavilion, and some Rodin sculptures were sent by the French state to the exhibition, but Lois Fuller insisted on having more sculptures, and she convinced Alma Spreckels, who was the wife of one of the Sugar King, Adolphe Spreckels, to buy some Rodin sculptures. And most of the sculptures which were exhibited in 1915 in San Francisco are today at the San Francisco Palace of the California Palace of the Legion of Honor. You have here two examples of these sculptures. Alors, the large St. John the Baptist, which is complete today. Donc, you recognize the head bust, which you have seen a little earlier. And you also have the Thinker, which is today in the middle of the courtyard of the Fine Arts Museum, and which was installed for a few years in the Botanical Garden of San Francisco. In this show, Rodin exhibited, Rodin, Leuchler, and Maspreckels chose at the same time some more traditional sculptures, like for instance St. John the Baptist, which we have just seen, which was a sculpture from the beginning of Rodin's career when he was influenced by the Italian Renaissance, but also some more modern sculptures such as the Prodigal Son and mainly this woman torso. Alors, the Prodigal Son is also a figure from the Gates of Hell. If you remember the small bronze Fugit Amor dedicated to Sarah Lowell, which we saw at the beginning of the lecture, it is a young man of the group, which was separated from the young woman and put vertically with his arms stretching to the sky. The sculpture was enlarged, was translated into stone, and then Rodin had a bronze cast made on the stone, and he decided to have some bronze copies which could be exhibited or sold to collectors. But what is really interesting in that case is the question of the base, because as you can see, the base was cut on the two sides, because of course it was, since it was a stone at the beginning, it was very large and not very convenient to install in an apartment, for instance. Have it more narrow and to get rid of the two sides of the base. And Rodin did not bother to close this opening, and so the Prodigal Son is standing, is kneeling on a kind of an arch. Which, of course, is a strange way of showing a sculpture. And in the women torso, Rodin goes still further. It is a torso of the martyr, which is a large, full figure. And here he kept only the torso, but a torso very cut just here at the top of the les hanches, of the heels, and cut also at the shoulders. And what remains is really a very strange work of art when you think that we are in 1915. Rodin sent it to San Francisco, and Maspreckels decided to buy it, which I think was very bold on her side. She was, of course, encouraged by Leuchler, who admired these new sculptures by Rodin. And Alma had also this beautiful group, the Fallen Angel, made with two different figures from the Gates of Hell, which are intertwined. And here again, the first version was a marble, and you can feel here the carving of the marble as a wave, when the feathers of the wings and the hair and the water, everything become confused, and we do not know any longer in front of which kind of material we are. We have here one of the more, perhaps of the more symbolist works by Rodin. Maspreckels was not always ready to buy what Leuchler wanted her to have. Sometimes she said that it was too expensive, that she had enough sculptures and she did not want anymore. And Alma had to find somebody else, and she found Samuel Hill, who was also a very rich man, and who became interested in Rodin under the influence of Leuchler, and he bought the sculptures and drawings, and mainly drawings, which Alma did not want to have, and he gave them to a future museum, the Merrill Museum of Art in Goldendale, in the state of Washington, very far, very remote place. And among these sculptures, you have a very important plaster, which is the model plaster for Eve. Perhaps I remind you that sculpture always begins by being a model in clay or in plaster, and then you can translate this model from plaster to marble, for instance, which a mechanical machine which needs to lean itself on some points. And you have here the back of Eve with all these little marks, these points, and with lines, which helps the assistant, the marble assistant, to carve the marble. With these points and also with the main points which are here on the buttocks, we have been able to decide that this model was used for the stone which is today in Copenhagen. Because indeed you see here again these main points, as they are called, right in the middle of the buttocks, as you can see them on the plaster. So it's and you can see here the stone in being carved by Bourdelle, because Bourdelle, the sculptor Antoine Bourdelle, was one of Rodin's assistants in his studio in Paris. And Hill bought also a beautiful series of drawings, about 20 or 21 drawings, which Loy has bought in the previous years, and she hoped to sell to Alma, but Alma did not want the drawings. So Loy tried to sell them to Cleveland, but it did not work. And at the end, it was Samuel Hill who bought these wonderful drawings. There are quite a lot of them. Drawings rehearsed with watercolor and this use of watercolor full of water, which creates some stains, and then Rodin, from these stains, enrich the first drawing. And we have been lucky enough to get quite perhaps 4 or 5 of these drawings for the show. And we are very grateful to our colleague of Merrill Hill. And Merrill and San Francisco lent also small plasters. These plasters, after Rodin's death, were in the art market in Paris, because even if he did not like to part with the plasters, Rodin gave some of them to friends or to journalists, to people which he wanted to thank in a special way. And Loy-Fuller tried to find them in the art market in Paris, and then she sold them either to Almas Records or to Samuel Hill. So the 2 torsos belong to the Los Angeles Museum, and this faunus, sometimes called Eve or Dawn, and these hands here belong to the Merrill Museum of Art. And again, it's a luck for the show to have been able to have all these beautiful examples of Rodin's work. Alors, among the small plasters, you have the Hand of God, which is a very, very interesting example, because I think it was of the first state of this famous composition. The idea was to use the hand of one of the burghers of Calais and to put inside this couple which figure Adam and Eve, the first human couple. And the idea is to show God as if he was a modeler, as if he used to model the clay to create the universe. At the beginning, the hand was exhibited on the other side, just as if it was going out of the wall. And you can see here this little hook, which is perhaps a sign that Rodin wanted this plaster to be exhibited that way. We thought of showing it again in the same manner, but in the end the plaster was too fragile, and we preferred show it in a more traditional way as it is here. But you can see that here the base is rather thin, rather small. When the composition was transferred into marble, it became much more large, much more important. And of course, the idea is a contrast between the materials, the first world, and the first couple, the hand who creates life. But from the marble, you can also have a bronze. And we also have in the show this bronze from Pittsburgh, which is a bronze cast from a marble. And in that way, you have the three main materials of sculpture, the three main materials Rodin used to handle: plaster, marble, and bronze, side by side. And I hope it helps the public to understand the job of sculpture. And again, with the hand of God, Rodin decided to diminish the base, which was, of course, huge, as you can see it in the marble, and he cut out a part of the base. And when you walk all around the bronze, you can see the inside of the sculpture, which is rather strange. Pourquoi ça veut qu'est-ce qui se passe là? Sorry. So the West Coast is really very important for the collections of Rodin's art. But at the same moment, other collections developed on the East Coast, and first of all in Baltimore with Jacob Epstein, who at the same moment bought some sculptures which were on the art market or commissioned bronze to, not to Rodin himself because Rodin was dead, but to the Rodin Museum. And he was able to buy this beautiful cast of the Kiss, one of the first casts, which belonged a friend of Rodin, a painter, Alfred Roll. Those men exchanged their work, a painting against a sculpture. And after Roll's death, the sculpture was sold out, and Epstein could buy it. And it's a very, very precise, very nervous cast, which helps to understand how the casts are sometimes more beautiful than the marbles. It is also a cast from a plaster and not from a marble, which is the case of most of the Kiss cast, and you can see it when you look at the base with this, which is more strong, and you cannot see the marks of the tool as in the cast from marble. And Epstein also commissioned a sinker, a large sinker, because you remember the small sinker we saw earlier, a sinker at the size of the gates of hell. But after 1900, Rodin understood that when you enlarge a sculpture, it becomes a completely new sculpture, because of course it has different relations with the space which is all around. And Rodin was very sensitive to this question of the relations between the sculpture and its context. So he enlarged the Thinker. The Thinker was exhibited in 1903. It had a great success. And it is at that moment that it became the very, very famous sculpture that it is today. Because the public understood that it was in the same time a man who was thinking, a philosopher, a poet, somebody like that, but also he had his strong body, which shows that he is also a worker, and that work and thought can go together. Alors, the enlargement is a very mechanical work, and here I have put some images of the base of the small thinker and of the large one, and you can see that the details are exactly the same. You find them again. For instance, this solo here is exactly the same here. But of course, when it is enlarged, the details are a little different because some of them are much more soft and almost disappear. Jacob Epstein was probably influenced by the Masbaum. Alors Masbaum was a king of cinema, of movie, and he was from Philadelphia. He went to Paris in the 20s, and he enjoyed a lot Rodin sculptures. And he decided that he wanted to build a Rodin collection, which finally he gave, as you know, to the city of Philadelphia in 1929. And in Philadelphia, he had a museum built to have the collection. And the museum is, which you can see here, is a copy of the Rodin Museum in Meudon. Meudon is a little town near Paris where Rodin used to live and have his studio. And in Meudon, Rodin has the facade of a French castle, the castle of Issy-les-Moulineaux, rebuilt because Rodin enjoyed a lot 18th century architecture. And Rodin's tomb is just in front of the facade of Issy-les-Moulineaux. And as you can see, this installation was replicated in Philadelphia, where you have again the large thinker on this tall base in front of this facade. And today, behind this facade, you have a museum with all Rodin's plasters. But during Rodin's lifetime, it was just a wall, and the windows were opened on the sky, just as it is here in Philadelphia. Alors, Masbaum was interested in the most traditional works by Rodin. He had the first cast of the Gates of Hell, made in 27-29, and he also thought that it was necessary to have a replica of the large marble kiss, which at that time was perhaps the most famous work by Rodin. And even if Rodin was dead, the museum agreed to have this fourth copy made for Philadelphia, because the Rodin Museum thought it was a very good publicity for the Rodin Museum in Paris. And you can see here the interior space of the Philadelphia Museum with this copy of the Kiss. But Masbaum was not at all interested in the modern Rodin, and for instance, he had not the Balzac, he had not the Walking Man. But he succeeded to get some works which were perhaps original works by Rodin, when at the beginning it was agreed that he would only have casts, new casts made for his museum. And also, of course, sculptures that he could buy in the art market. But here we have this beautiful mask of Rose Beuret. Rose Beuret was Rodin's long life companion, and Rodin married her just a few months before they died. And it is, of course, a very special work, very, very surprising with this polychromy, which makes us think that she's just living and asleep in front of us. And of course, this kind of work can only come from Rodin studio. It's impossible to think that it was made in the 20s for Masbaum when he commissioned all these sculptures. And same thing for this plaster, very interesting. There is no other copy exactly the same in the Rodin Museum storage. And again, I think that it is an original plaster from Rodin. It's a rare composition because here the figure is just closed in this very rich drapé, and it is very unusual in Rodin's work. So Masbaum, the Rodin Museum has been enriched also by Rodin sculptures which were on the art market. And for instance, this marble, which was bought by John Johnson. John Johnson is the founder of the PMA, of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. He was the main collector. It was a very important collector in Philadelphia, and his collections are vraiment the core of the museum. But he also had some Rodin sculptures, such as this one, which is a portrait of Camille Claudel, just on this very large and square base. And at the same time, Masbaum had some unique casts. This shame is as a small assemblage which belongs Sarah Hallwell. We do not know any other version of this composition. And of course, the collection had also drawings. Alors, these drawings are today, some of them at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and some of them belong to private collectors, because some of the drawings were in Masbaum private collection, and then went to his heirs, and then in the art market. These drawings belong to different periods of Rodin's work. This one is from the beginning, the time of the Gates of Hell, when Rodin used to work and rework with ink and different kind of gouache his drawings. Sometimes he cut them out and stuck them again on new sheet of papers and reworks the drawings. But you have also very free drawings like this one with the gouache. The gouache parts. Of course, we have to remember that the paper was not as yellow as it is today in the beginning, and the contrast was not as strong as it is today. This one is also from the beginning of Rodin's work, and it is a drawing which was reconstructed from memory and from the work that Rodin used to do in the Manufacture de Sèvres when he was employed to decorate vases. And here you have one of these beautiful Cambodian dancers, which Rodin drew by 1906 when the Cambodian ballet played in Paris. The last section is called The Revival. And of course, since it gathers sculptures which entered American collection after 1950, you have sculptures or drawings from very different periods. It's a shortened view of Rodin sculpture. And for instance, you have here the Age of Bronze, which is one of the first sculptures by Rodin, and the Walking Man, which belongs to the end of his career. But the Age of Bronze was bought by Gerald B. Cantor, one of the main Rodin collectors of the United States, quite late, because he thought that it was really important to have a copy of this sculpture in his collection. Alors, this time begins by a moment of disinterest for Rodin at the time of the war or just after, at the time when Iris was deaccessioned by Boston. This Iris, which is of course a very free and very surprising figure, a very sensual one also, was given to the MFA by an antique collector, Perry Warren, in 1908. It was never exhibited by Boston, and in the end, they decided to sell out the sculpture. And the sculpture was given to Kurt Valentin, to the art dealer Kurt Valentin, in exchange of small bronzes. But at the same moment, Kurt Valentin had another Iris, which was a recent cast from the Musée Rodin, and he sold two Iris, one in 54, the other one in 55, to two different collectors, and one is today in the Beyer Foundation in Basel, and the other one at the Hirshhorn collection in Washington. And today it's impossible to know which is the Boston one. We have tried to look very carefully at the two sculptures, but with the curators and conservators of the two collections. But until today, it has been impossible to decide which one was the Boston one. So we decided to have the Hirshhorn Iris, since it is in American collection. And in fact, the first provenance is not so important. What is interesting today is to understand that this modern Rodin was discovered and appreciated in the United States only in the second half of the 20th century. And it is also the moment when the Balzac entered the collection of the MoMA. The MoMA at the same moment sent some sculptures by Mayol or Despiaux to the Met, because he thought they were not modern enough for the collection. But Alfred Barr decided that he wanted to have a copy of the Balzac, which he thought was a key sculpture in the history of 20th century. Kurt Valentin died at that moment, but his friends presented this copy to the MoMA. This bronze is always on view in the sculpture garden or in the entrance of the institution. And again, we have been very happy to be able to show it at the Clark in this exhibition, because we thought it was really important to explain all this story of the taste for Rodin. Almost at the same moment, René Cheruy, who had been Rodin secretary, gave Princeton University, where he finished his life, this very interesting and very rare cutout by Rodin. In the same way that he used to suppress, for instance, legs or arms, which he thought were not important to understand the sculpture, Rodin used to cut out his drawings and then be able to reuse them in new compositions. And when there are free, like this one, they are again very, very modern. They are very open to the 20th century. So in parallel, of course, we have the working man. Alors, you remember the small working man belonging to the Simpsons. We saw at the beginning of the lecture. Rodin enlarged the working man at the beginning of the 20th century in 1905, 1906, and he exhibited it in 1907. And it was just the same thing As for the thinker, it was at that moment that it was discovered by the public and the press, and admired a lot, admired as a kind of renaissance of antiquity, which I think was not at all what Rodin was looking for, but at least it put the figure on a prominent place. So here you see perfectly well the contrast between the torso with some cracks, some holes, and the legs. And you can feel also the movement of the figure, which was Rodin wanted to express. At the time, he was no longer interested in subject. The sculpture has no longer to tell a story to be interesting, but it has just to be strong and to tell by itself what it has to tell. And in that case, it is this dynamism, this impression of movement, even if the 2 feet are strongly rooted in the base, which is not the real movement of walking. Alors, this sculpture, 2 bronzes, I think, were cast during Rodin's lifetime, but it was much too modern to be appreciated and understood. And it was only after the Second World War that other casts were made. And the figure was very much appreciated in the United States. And as you can see, there are 10 casts which were bought by American collectors and which are today in American museums. I remember you perhaps that as long as the artist was living, in the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, he was allowed to make as many casts as he wanted, and as many casts as he had the clients to buy them. And it was only after in the 60s that there was a law in France limiting to 12 casts each series of sculpture. Alors, of course, when the sculpture has been cast before, as it is the case, for instance, for the Age of Bronze or for the Thinker, there is no limit. Even if there are about 45 thinkers in the size of the Gates of Hell, all of them are considered as original casts. But for the figures which were cast only after that date, the limit is 12. And for that reason, it is very important to know exactly where the casts are. And we can have this kind of list. And all these casts have to wear the copyright of the museum, the name of the founder, the date of the cast, and the number in the series. Voilà, so it's two, the cutout and the walking man both together, because we are in that moment of this Rodin open to all the new researchers and opening the way for the 20th century artists. But Rodin had a large studio to support, and he go on selling marbles when he had commissioned. And one of the last important acquisitions made in an American collection is this marble of Christ and Mary Magdalene, which you can see here, and which is the second version of a composition which we know through a plaster here and through a first marble here. Rodin had about 50 assistants, and he could trust them totally. And when he had commissioned, he agreed to have new marbles carved. Of course, these compositions are very, very symbolist. And what is so interesting is the huge mass of marble in which appears the figures. And as time passed, the marbles were more and more huge, and the figures more and more closed inside this block of marbles. These last years, I've seen, after the time when the modern Rodin interested collectors, there was a time in which collectors were interested in all the periods of Rodin's career. So we have seen Christ and Mary Magdalene marble, but we have also drawings from the very beginning of Rodin's work, drawings or bronzes, which appear in the United States. For instance, this very interesting drawing of the Thinker, or this one for the group of Ugolino, which was condemned to death by starving, and which Rodin shows here sitting with his sons and grandsons, which he's going to eat, reason for which he will be condemned to hell. And after a while, Rodin thought the composition would be stronger if Ugolino was on his floor, on the bodies of his sons already dead. And the bronze, which is now on loan at the Clark, is the first bronze. It belonged to Henri Le Roll, who was a friend of the painter Edgar Degas, and we can see it in some of the so valuable photographs made by Degas. It's again a very nice bronze. And to finish, at the same moment, this beautiful and much freer and more modern drawings entering American collections. It's only a choice. I could show much more of them. I have chosen these three. This one because all of them, first of all, are beautiful drawings. But this one belonged Monet. The painter Claude Monet was Rodin's friend, and Rodin gave Monet this drawing as a sign of their friendship. This one shows Nijinsky, the famous dancer Nijinsky in Paris in 1913, and he is enriched with this beautiful pink veil. And this one is one of these figures which Rodin used to put in different directions. Here the figures is falling down as in hell, and the drawing is enriched again with this stain of brown color dipped in water. I hope you will enjoy. I hope you will be able to visit the show and enjoy this kind of panorama of the interest American public always show to Rodin. Thank you very much.